All right, welcome again to Triple Take Cinema. I'm one of your hosts, Dustin, along with Kyle and Alex. And this week we're talking about three movies from the 90s about superheroes that are detectives and are kind of noir. And Alex's video feed just cut out again, but that's okay. We're just going to run with it. The three movies we're talking about this week are Sam Raimi's The Shadow. No, he didn't do The Shadow. It's the music cut out or whatever. We're just running with this shit.
We're rolling.
We're rolling. We'll do it live, as Bill O'Reilly famously said. Sam Raimi's Darkman, some other dudes, The Shadow with Alec Baldwin and
Windsor, something Windsor,
Simon Windsor, and The Phantom with Billy Zane, who you might know from Titanic or Tales from the Crypt's Demon Knight. Are the two things I think of with Billy Zane, which are kind of random. So I picked these movies because I was familiar with them all. I believe as a child I had seen The Phantom. I'd seen parts of The Shadow and parts of Darkman. But I just was kind of like, these movies all fit in kind of a weird clumping. And originally I had also added Dick Tracy to the mix. We decided to cut that out for a future episode, but I feel like it would kind of fit thematically here as well. Just like kind of weird one-off adaptations of existing. Well, I guess Darkman's only like is an original character, but The Shadow and The Phantom were existing comic book characters or comic strip characters. And so those were the three movies that we tackled. So as I noted, I'd seen The Phantom, I believe, in its entirety when I was a kid. Parts of The Shadow and parts of Darkman, but neither of those in their entirety. Kyle, what about you? Had you had any familiarity with any of these movies prior to tackling them for this episode?
I had familiarity with The Phantom and The Shadow, but only familiarity, not intimacy, if you will. Hadn't seen them. And Darkman, I had not seen or heard of at all before you suggested this trio. So yeah, now I will say I have listened to a healthy tranche of Shadow actual radio broadcasts, driving cross country.
Yep.
With my father, picked him up at the good old Cracker Barrel. I don't know if you guys know about that, but back in the day when you go to Cracker Barrel, you get yourself a chicken fried steak. And you go and you look at all of these expensive Coca-Cola memorabilia that you can buy. Well, we didn't do any of that. We went to the cassette tape rack and we picked up the Green Hornet and Fibber McGee and Molly and the Bickersons, which is maybe the most offensive radio broadcast ever put on radio. and The Shadow was kind of the main one. I think by the end of it, I had like 18 cassette tapes of Shadow episodes that we would watch, much to my sister's chagrin. But c'est la vie. So yeah, that's my that's how I'm coming in on this.
How about you, Alex?
Yeah, so I had seen Darkman when I was on a Sam Raimi kick, probably around 10 years ago. I saw The Three Evil Deads, and I figured I'd see Darkman. Really dug it at the time. I think I dug it more on this rewatch, as we'll get into. The Phantom I was familiar with because I remember seeing the poster for it at our local video rental place in my hometown.
There's something kind of like that sticks with you about Billy Zane and that giant, like, weird purple onesie. I feel like
because it's a terrible costume. I feel like he's gonna be in a Pepto-Bismol ad or something.
It's so bad, and I think it's even like I remember seeing like the cover on VHS at our local video store for that all the time, and I feel like it would have been better if it had just been like plain purple. But the fact that they had like weird kind of patterns on it and stuff made it feel not of the time that it was from. But that's getting off topic right now. But I as well remember that like iconography of seeing that it sticks out more than these other two, I feel like, on the video shelf for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And The Shadow I was aware of, but never sought out, and just knew its reputation as kind of a middling dud, similar to The Phantom, is kind of where I placed them in, my movie knowledge. Is these were misfires, but more interesting misfires than I would have guessed, as I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah. So I'd like to start with I'm going to do these in order from my least favorite to my most favorite, which is not quite the order I watched them in. But I did watch The Phantom first, and that was my least favorite of this bunch. And I feel like for me, the reason The Phantom fell flat was it just was a bit of a snooze fest. Like it was very competently done and well acted, I felt like, and looks good, but it's just a bit of a bore. Like I just don't feel like there's much going on here, and it's a lot of talk and a lot of like standing and like, you know, chesting up to the camera, but like not much else to it. I do feel like Treat Williams as the villain was having a blast and doing his best to like choose scenery, and I in particular really kind of enjoyed that scene earlier, like pretty early on. I feel like I think it's the first time you meet him where he has the scientist come in. I think it's a scientist that he wants him to look at something under a microscope, and he's got this elaborate microscope rigged up so that when the guy looks at it, it'll stab him in both of his eyes, which I just appreciate the pure diabolical insanity of like going through the time to have somebody design a microscope that can do that for conceivably a one-off use in a very specific circumstance. But that to me was probably the most redeeming part of like watching Treat Williams kind of enjoy being the villain. But I feel like Billy Zane was a bit of a bore, and the Phantom as a character is just a bit of a snooze factor for me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the Phantom is a cardboard cutout of a cardboard cutout. There's just nothing there in terms of what is his interiority. I have no fucking idea. I just know he's a dude in a purple suit who inherited this mantle from his father and is kind of noble and kind of charming. I actually really liked Billy Zane as the Phantom when we got to see him in New York with his suit off and he was actually emoting like a human being. I thought he did a good job of being kind of the debonair playboy. Side note, I also thought it was funny that both the Phantom and the Shadow pull kind of a similar narrative trick where we start out in this exotic location and then there's a point where it's like we're going to go to the true seedy underbelly and it's fucking New York City.
Yeah,
And yeah, I thought the Shadow or the Phantom rather got better when we got to New York and I thought Billy Zane was more compelling as a character, but yeah, there wasn't a lot there for me to grab onto. Um, Xander Drax, which is Treat Williams' character's name, uh, did give me a lot of enjoyment, and I had a smile on my face whenever he was on screen.
yeah. Rest in peace. He passed away a few years ago. Um, I always think of him from the TV show Everwood and from Deep Rising, which was like a horror action film, like a B movie from the mid '90s that we had on VHS, and I wore the hell out of that tape because I watched it all the time. Also in this was Catherine Zeta-Jones, which I had
Oh yeah.
completely forgotten that she was in this.
Woo.
So it was kind of fun seeing her, but she didn't really have much to work with. Before I just drop other random things that I remember about this, because I watched this like 4 weeks ago now. Kyle, what did you think of the Phantom?
Oh, The Phantom was my most enjoyable watch of the three.
That is fascinating. I
I'm
would
gonna
love.
boot you out of this podcast room right now because that is the
Mhm.
shittiest hot take I've ever heard.
I know. I know. Well,
Explain
I
yourself,
Yeah,
sir.
well,
Explain
justify
yourself.
this. Justify
I
this
I
immediately.
really, I mean, you guys have said the reasons why I enjoyed it. I thought that the Xander, the villain, Xander, was great. And in terms of I
I would probably say of these three movies that Xander, like Treat Williams, was the best villain.
yes.
I will give this that 100%
I would
over.
totally agree with that.
Okay, see, well, there. Okay, so there's my hook. There's my way in. Is I appreciated watching him work. Um, I find Billy Zane to be hilarious. Just as an
Like
just
the
in the way.
idea of Billy
Just
Zane.
yes. First of all,
Yeah,
his name sounds
yeah,
fake.
yeah. It does.
Probably
It
is,
does.
but like
Yeah,
it just anytime you're like, oh, Billy Zane's in this movie, I'm like, well, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
I'm interested in watching that.
yeah.
And
There's
a lot of that comes from from Titanic.
Titanic, and he was
Because
also
Mhm.
in Zoolander as himself. Now that I'm
oh
recalling
yeah,
that too,
that's
that's
correct.
yeah,
That was a
yeah,
good turn. But that him being himself in Zoolander sums up exactly my feelings
yeah.
about Billy
No,
Zane.
for sure.
Do you know
I
what I
feel
mean?
like yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure. He feels like I don't want to say a parody of a person, but it's like difficult to see him as a real person, which seems like a really
Yes.
cruel thing to say about
Which I
someone. But
think it's all right. He's got money. Which like I kind of liked the, the non. I guess we'll get into it the other movies, so I don't want to just like give it all away. But I do actually in the world of Marvel suits, having just gotten out of like Deadpool and Wolverine and enjoyed that and all those things. But like you see the suits there, and then you see this suit, and this suit is kind of like, oh, he actually had to like be in shape to wear this thing. Like they didn't really get all effectsy
yeah,
on it, and I kind of
No,
liked
that's true.
I liked how that was almost muted. Like it was really a dude in a leotard. It wasn't like it wasn't
yeah,
really. It didn't feel like a superhero. It felt like a dude in a leotard. And yeah, just the tone of his character, I liked more than a lot of the other protagonists that we dealt with. And it never, other than Xander for me, it never got to. Well, I'll just get into it a little bit, but like the tone of the other two movies is something. It's a tone of a movie type that I have a hard time staying with. And I know that I don't necessarily disagree that with your take on it being kind of snoozy, but also it was well made in a certain
yeah.
sense.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I feel like I mean, and I would I I say that I agree with that in the perspective that I don't feel like Shadow and Darkman were poorly made necessarily,
correct.
but I feel like
Well,
this movie like had a very like it did feel very vintage in its presentation, like of kind of like 1930s, 1940s Hollywood kind of like it almost felt to me in a way that like it could have been a movie that was made in 1940 or 1945 or something like that, but like
yeah,
in a grand old style kind of Hollywood. It feels very uh what's the,
It's on the tip of your tongue. What I'm thinking is it is Indiana Jones with the serial numbers filed off.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and that's where I think it's strongest is it has some really solid set pieces when they're crossing the rope bridge with
Uh-huh.
trucks. Like, is it a knockoff of Sorcerer? Probably, but is it a pretty cool set piece? Definitely.
no idea
And
how that truck stayed on. By the way, no idea. The
no,
physics of that were great.
and then, the horseback chase with his dog companion and the fact
Uh-huh.
that his dog friend and his horse have like a little rapport going on. Liked that. But yeah, when this was leaning into its roots as kind of a 30s, 40s serial adventure story rather than, you know, kind of the film noir elements, I think it was in the movie's favor. I think it was strong when it
Yeah.
was doing those set piece, dogfighting in a plane, horseback chase, uh, trucks on the rope bridge. All that was good shit.
I do like there's kind of like there's a exchange that to me kind of sums up, and this is also like in stark contrast to anything that would happen in the other two movies, where she's like, "Oh, your dog's a wolf," and he doesn't even really respond. She's just kind of like, mm-hmm. Like he gives like a Billy Zane look in the Phantom costume, and it's just kind of very matter of fact. But it just yeah. So for me, the tone of it made it. I don't know. It just made it something that appealed to me as a watch more.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the suit's a little silly, but I also just like I don't know. I just appreciated watching it go out in front of me, and it didn't really do anything other than the villain for me was like kind of it was a nice juxtaposition to all the other characters,
Huh.
and yeah, and I kind of felt like in The Shadow and in um
Darkman.
Darkman, there is no chill. There's
Yeah.
no chill across characters. There's no one who's, I don't know, who's kind of like a grounding thing. And honestly, that's probably why a lot of people enjoy it in that way. And I'm sure we'll get into those aspects. But yeah, that's my general take. I enjoyed it the most. I also think that there was no way I was gonna. Well, we can get into that as well. But there was no way I was gonna enjoy the Phantom after it. Like literally from the moment it started, I was like, this is not.
You
This
mean
is.
the Shadow? You mean?
That's what I mean. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
There's no way I was gonna watch The Shadow with my history with the radio show and its power of nostalgia over me. With like, what's also kind of funny to me is that my dad and I listened to these tapes endlessly, and this movie came out, and we were both like, "Huh,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
let's watch some baseball." Like we never even. It was one of those. It's one of those weird things where my dad was just like, "I don't need this on visual." I grew up. My dad's 83, so like he grew up listening to the radio. This was not like a thing that he learned about. This is a thing he lived. And
But
so,
it didn't cross his mind or your mind to be like, oh, let's check that out. We listen to it all the time.
yeah, we lived. The movie came out, and we were like, "Do you want to sit in the dark music room and listen to The Shadow again?" Yeah, let's definitely do that. So, yeah,
Is that a
that's
room in your house when you were growing up? The dark music room?
yeah. It was like a room with like two giant chairs and a bunch of shit I couldn't touch, and like old Revolutionary War guns in the cabinets and a bunch of records and a stereo system that I didn't understand because
That
that's
sounds
how
pretty
stereo
badass.
systems were,
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yeah. I
So
think we can shift to the Shadow in just a second because that was the second one I wanted to cover. But I wanted to point out three things. The first thing really being that, and it just occurred to me, and as we've been having this conversation, that one thing I will give, and I guess the Shadow maybe a little bit does. Well, Shadow definitely does this, and Darkman does it. And there's nothing inherently bad about an origin story. They can be done really well. As we all know in Marvel Cinematic Universe fatigue, like Spider-Man's been done so many times, Batman's been done so many times with origin stories. I will say with the Phantom, I would argue it's for worse here, but I appreciate that the fact that they did not do this as an origin story. I think that may factor into why it was a box office bomb
mhm.
because for even in 1990 this character was pretty damn obscure, so like to just introduce him in this goofy ass outfit and like with this goofy ass demeanor and expect people to be like, yeah, I'm here for this, is probably a bridge too far. Not probably, like clearly was a bridge too far. But I want to give them some props for that because it is for a hero that is an existing IP but is relatively unknown to your new audience. Um, that is a bold choice to go through. It didn't really pan out here, but they should get some points for that.
No, yeah,
The,
No,
nothing
that's
would make
totally
me
fair.
nothing would make me happier than a Phantom reboot that was the origin story with Billy Zane.
with
Like
Billy Zane, he's
that would
somehow
be
he's somehow 30 years older, but also
yeah.
being like younger or
Oh,
something.
you can just
Yeah,
movie
they
magic
don't
that.
address it.
I mean,
Yeah.
that I guess.
That's even better, Alex. They just carry on.
Well, that would kind of be like another really weird component to this movie that I feel like, I mean, we didn't talk about it until now, is the fact that like his dad shows up as a ghost, but like just like that just feels like I didn't know. I loved how like nonchalant like when his dad walks in, the old Phantom that died, that James Remar killed, was just straight up talking to him in like the Phantom like cave or whatever, like his hideout thing. And then his like assistant kid or whatever comes and is like, oh, were you talking to someone? And he's like, nope, not talking to anyone. But like that his dad just was like there and then just like kind of vanished. And then later on shows up in the back of a taxi, like in New York. Like there's so much about that was just kind of like, wait, like, is this what? Why?
See,
What?
I'm really glad you brought that up, Dustin, because I do need to talk a little bit more shit about this movie before we move on. And it's mostly on a like script and story level where there were just lots of moments where I had that reaction of, wait, what? Huh? and things just didn't make sense the way they should in a coherent universe, where
Yeah.
I didn't buy that all of these villains couldn't conceptualize of a mantle being passed from father to son. Like the conclusion that they'd come to is, oh, the the ghost who walks the phantom must be immortal because, because I killed him and yet there he is. And you couldn't think that this could maybe be a
Another
legacy.
person.
That's right, another
Yeah.
person that is wearing this costume. So that was like one beef for me that just kept recurring because it's such a big part of the narrative is the villains being like, he's immortal, like, what are we gonna do? And it's even treated like a reveal to the audience when Billy Zane tells his love interest, whose name I'm blanking on, that oh yeah, my father was the Phantom and passed it on to me. So that being treated as a reveal was dumbfounding to me. And I just thought the whole romance subplot was kind of creepy in the way that it ended, with him being like, become my broodmare and birth
Yeah.
like the next iteration of the Phantom in this cave. And I actually appreciated that she rejects him at the end, but
Yeah.
there's still that line where he's like, she'll be back.
Yeah.
And I think the movie wants us to believe that she'll be back, but yeah, that whole like subplot, was very weird and like oddly misogynistic to me.
Yeah. And that was Christy Swanson as Diana Palmer. And I feel like this was right in her sweet spot of when she was doing stuff. She was 2 years out of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or 4 years, sorry, because Buffy was in 92 and The Phantom was in 96. I always feel like it was like a 94 movie to me. But that's always because to me, the 90s feel like two different decades, like 1990 to 95, and then 96 to 99 feels like a completely different decade in terms of how things looked and felt. So the other two things I wanted to really quickly call out here is Kyle, you talked about like the costume and how like it really didn't leave much to the imagination and kind of forced Billy Zane to show off. According to Wikipedia, he spent over a year and a half to get the right muscular look for the Phantom. And then the other thing that I think is kind of cool is that he was in competition with Bruce Campbell for the role. It would have been really interesting to see Bruce Campbell as the Phantom, though I feel like he could have done it in the 90s here, but I also feel like he's too much kind of a smarmy asshole for the Phantom. Like Billy Zane adds this kind of like do-gooder kind of attitude to it. And I mean, we have the benefit of hindsight having seen Titanic before seeing this, but like this came out before Titanic. So like I think after Titanic, most people kind of viewed him as an asshole, right? Because of his character in Titanic. Well, if you were going in and seeing this in 96, you'd probably be like, oh yeah, like he's goody two shoe Phantom creeper trying to find his broodmare. But uh, I just thought that was kind of interesting to hypothesize of what the movie would have been like with Bruce Campbell in it.
No, that's a good point, and I do think for how paper thin the Phantom was as a character, Billy Zane did a real solid job of giving him some charisma, some humanity.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, another like just to go on this, like how much Titanic has. Let's just talk about Billy Zane more, but how much Titanic has changed who Billy Zane, like what his image was, right? Because the Phantom is 96, but I really remember Billy Zane initially, or I guess not even really initially, but I was jarred because I saw Titanic before I saw Tombstone. And in
Oh
Tombstone,
yeah,
he's like the most gentle summer child in the middle of Arizona with like his traveling, theater group that doesn't make any sense against, and it was, and that right, I mean, he's like such a little baby fawn in that movie.
it's
So yeah,
funny.
he has like, but of
I
course,
forgot
yeah.
he was in Tombstone.
Oh yeah,
The,
dude.
the other thing is he was in it was either New Zealand or Australian movie called Dead Calm, which was like a thriller with Nicole Kidman and Sam Neill, where Billy Zane, Nicole Kidman, Sam Neill are a couple on a sailboat in the ocean, and Billy Zane shows up like on another decrepit boat and they save him, but he turns out to be a psychopath. And I don't remember when I saw that, but I know that came out before the Phantom, I think.
Yeah, that's 1989.
Oh wow, 89. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So and then he was also in Back to the Future 1 and 2. I always forget about that too. Not that he had a big role in those, but um, yeah. So interesting. I mean, Billy Zane, right? Like, and then you go look at his like post 2000 filmography and post 2010, and let's see, 2012, The Scorpion King 3, Battle for Redemption. What else sounds good? Zoolander 2, Dead Rising Endgame, Sniper, Ghost Shooter, Sniper, Ultimate Kill. He did back to back a movie called The Great War, and then he did Ghosts of War. So there's how far the mighty have fallen, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see these movies and I see a person collecting a paycheck.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Which
I
I
do
would do too.
Yeah. So
I do
speaking,
see the alternate future where we would have gotten Billy Zane as a mega star. Because
for sure.
he's got that wattage, he's got the smile, he's got the charisma. He just didn't have the hits to back it up, and he
Yeah.
kind of floundered as a result.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that's the case. It's just it speaks to how important like choosing good roles can be, and some of that is also obviously having good roles offered to you too. So speaking of collecting a paycheck, let's talk about Alec Baldwin in The Shadow. This was my middle one for these. Like I liked it more than The Phantom, but mainly because I feel like I don't feel like The Shadow is a more competently done movie or a better story necessarily, but I feel like there's more interesting ideas in here to me than there was in The Phantom. Like I don't feel like any of it lands well. Let me put that out there to begin with. I think it's this weird hodgepodge cornucopia of weird ass ideas that just get mixed up and are poorly executed or interestingly executed, but then buffered by dumb choices and weird facts and things like that. But there's enough in it that just like kind of like interests me. That I remember like catching it on TV and like the whole thing about uh like the bad guys like hotel base being camouflaged to the whole city and like that sticking in my head. The fucking weirdness of like when Alec Baldwin becomes the Phantom, that he like suddenly has a fake
The Shadow.
nose, or the Shadow. Yes.
The fake nose is outrageous.
I love
It's
Yes.
an
the fake
outrageous
nose
choice.
for its
It's
stupidity.
yeah, but it's so like but it's outrageous and stupid, but also kind of like brilliant too. Like it's just this weird, and the fact that like I still don't know like it it's like one of three things, right? Like it's either a like he's putting on like a prosthetic no like in the universe of the movie, right? Like either a he's putting on a prosthetic nose and we're just like not seeing it happen. B, he's hypnotizing people to make them think he looks that way, but he doesn't look that way. Or C, he's literally like morphing into that look. And it's not clear which of those three scenarios is happening. I think it's probably the hypnotizing one.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
I think it's B, but they're not explicit in any way.
yeah,
No.
yeah. And then like there's so many other little like weird like nuggets that I feel like in better hands could have made like become something much more interesting. Like I loved the his like messenger network he has through the city of all the people that like work for him. And there's this one like tracking shot when they're sending like a note through pneumatic tubes that literally like seem to run along every building in New York City. And I remember watching that and being like, this is like the dumbest, most impractical thing, but I also kind of love it. But like, how did he install all of this? Like I thought that was interesting. I like the weird little the dagger thing that appears at the
Oh,
beginning and again
yeah.
at the end. That's just like, again, it's not great in this movie, but there's something interesting about it. I thought that the Shiwan Khan, the bad guy, John Lone, that actor, he is just fun to watch on screen because I feel like he always runs 100% in whatever characters he's playing. You've got Ian McKellen and Tim Curry. Like the cast in this is pretty damn stacked.
Oh yeah,
But
they spent cash. They spent some
yeah,
cash.
but there's just like none like there's so many cool little things. When you stitch them all together, it's a mess. It is what this movie is. But I think ultimately the one thing that like my biggest fault for this movie is how absolutely fucking nasty Alec Baldwin's nails are at the beginning of it when he's in his bad guy mode and they show his fingernails and they're like an inch and a half long and they're just like red and dirty. And I'm like, why would you live like that? How fucking gross is that? What is wrong with you?
See, those nails do some heavy lifting because we don't get a lot of like insight into what he was like as a warlord. We just get that costume design, and exactly, it makes you ask those questions like,
Yeah.
how deep into vile debauchery have you fallen to
Yeah.
fucking look like that?
And then seemingly get fully redeemed. Like that's an interesting
Instantly.
it's like as someone unfamiliar with the radio drama, it's like is this true to the character's backstory in the radio drama?
No, no.
Okay.
Yeah, Alex, I'm curious. Give your thoughts before I bring in the origin and what I know from the radio show, because I feel like that's. I hate to be the kind of person. I don't at all, but I'll say that I hate to be the kind of person to be like, well, the books are better, than these
Uh,
movies are. But like,
I would say that, and I've never even like listened to the other media for this,
yeah,
but I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like
yeah.
this is so bad that whatever else is out there has got to be better than it.
Yeah, yeah, but Alex, I'm curious your thoughts before I give any of that context.
Yeah, so I am pretty aligned with Dustin here in that I think there are enough interesting kernels executed poorly to amount to something that consistently held my interest. And I think the connective tissue was not any of those weird story elements. It was just the overall visual aesthetic and look of this movie, which I kind of dug the hell out of. I thought this is a way prettier movie than it has any right to be. Those beginning scenes when you're in, the shadows crime den, I guess in Tibet, and you have all these like lush curtains being draped. Like, I won't say it made me feel like I was watching a Wong Kar-wai movie, but it kind of made me feel like I was watching a Wong Kar-wai movie, who like also loves using these like deep reds and lush colors. I loved when we were in New York and the architecture like is very clearly evoking film noir. Um, I thought the visual effects when the shadow is actually fighting his enemies, and the way it does use light and darkness was clever. Yeah, the costuming was on point. I just think this is a pretty movie with some really interesting ideas. I will say that the shadow did not work for me at all as a character, and I almost kind of laughed when we skip over his origin in the most abrupt way, where there's this big title card basically saying, "Oh, he's good now. He was an evil warlord, but he reformed his ways because a sentient dagger was mean to him, and that convinced him that he should pursue the path of good." So we skip his origin story, and we also skip his backstory because I would have liked to see him doing some evil shit as a warlord in Tibet to actually give some pathos to, you know, the we're not so different, you and I, interactions between him and Genghis Khan's descendant, our villain here. So yeah, I thought this was mostly a misfire, but there's enough interesting and cool, and for me, it really was just that visual consistency that kept me engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the movie, yeah, that they never really in the radio stuff. Now there's a lot more shadow publications. There's some print stuff, some comic book stuff that does flesh out some things a little bit more. But I really just am going off the radio because I think the radio is kind of the most unique it's awesome to listen to some 1930s radio stuff like this, because it's just so it's so low tech, but also so like expertly done and all done live, and like it's I don't know, it's great. It just for that, but there is no that whole crazy backstory or whatever we got in the beginning, Alex. There really is none of that. It's kind of they don't spend time on a lot of that, and whenever they do touch on it, it's very vague. And I kind of always appreciated that when it came to listening to the Phantom, that the powers were never, like Spider-Man gets bit by a spider and becomes Spider-Man. You're like, yep, totally get it. And there's just nothing like that with the Shadow, and it's I don't know, it's so subtle and simple what his power is, which really is like, I mean, this is why, option B, Dustin, in your why does he change his appearance? It's because he does have, the ability, and really the ability is just to cloud men's minds. And most of it is to be invisible. And so he actually doesn't, there's no talk of like a costume in the radio stuff. That's not like something he needs. He's just with Margot, and also like all the episodes also, and it was something that I didn't really like about this, is how kind of grandiose the villain in this
Uh-huh.
was. Now
Yeah.
I appreciated the, like you said, I liked the character portrayal and all that, and that was like a nice intensity, but the scale of that
Yeah.
villain was very, I get why they made the decision for a big box film, but like that's not what the Phantom. That's very difficult. Very challenging.
Yeah.
That's not what the Shadow was about. The Shadow was about like, oh, we're going off on a nice weekend together as lovers do, and oh, we found some interesting thing happening in this faraway place, and oh, let's peel back the layers of this onion and see if there's any more interesting, potentially nefarious activities going on. And then the way that he breaks down the villains is, it's first of all, it's, yes, there are guns, but not nearly like is showed here.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, they're out guns blazing in that scene, and I definitely appreciated / hated when that one guy in the beginning was just like, I'm just going to shoot this Tommy gun in all directions, like a
On the
psycho.
bridge. Yeah. Yeah.
And he's not. He is, when the time comes, he does get physical most, with people he's trying to overpower or stop or whatever, but it's much more of an invisibility, and also the ability to throw his voice and
Uh-huh.
have this menacing voice and laugh, which on the radio also, like Orson Welles does a lot of the original voicing,
Oh,
which
that's
is
cool.
awesome. So I definitely encourage you guys to check out the YouTube on this, because all the episodes are available. It's super sweet. And another thing that's sweet is the old advertisements. I will always remember in advertisements for a product called Blue Coal, when people had to have coal delivered to their home, and you could get blue coal in 3 different versions. And
Amazing.
and like, yeah, so all these episodes are interrupted by like old timey advertisements, which are incredible. But yeah, so it's a lot more like Sherlock Holmesy, without, like it's a
Yeah.
lot more smaller, but also because of that, more interesting. And
Yeah.
then it's a lot more of also breaking down like his ability to be invisible and do the voice thing just kind of makes villains freak out in a
Uh-huh.
way that unravels their shit. And I appreciate that, like, compared to all the other superheroes I've gotten in my life, the Shadow is the most, oh, this is like a very, it's almost like a little bit like Professor X, where he can't overpower anyone, but he's got this ability to get in there and mess with people's heads and get in their heads a little bit, and that
Yeah.
all I really appreciated. So for this to be a lot more of a like shoot 'em up
Action.
a
Yeah.
type of action movie, with all that weird origin, non-origin backstory
Yeah.
stuff, with all of the huge implications of this villain, it just felt like they,
It's like it wasn't an adaptation of what it was. It was taking
yeah,
that character
Yeah.
and
and
blowing
kind
it
of,
up.
yeah,
Yeah. It was like,
and
okay,
just
So I might
great.
might
adding
jump in
Hollywood to
here
it.
Yeah.
with a quote from David Cope, who was the writer for this. He wrote Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones 4, and he was hired to write a draft of this. and he listened to the radio serial like you did when he was growing up, and said that in order to differentiate the Shadow from other superhero films of the time, Cope focused on the copy line, "Who knows what evil lurks in the heart of men?" and wondered how the Shadow knew what evil lurks in the hearts of men. And basically that's how, he came up with the origin story. Oh, it's because he was a bad guy too. So I think it's illuminating that they took the copy line for the radio show and didn't actually explore
Take
the
that.
character.
Yeah.
That's
They
so
Yeah.
just
weird,
they
man.
just took like a tag.
Because it's so much more of like he is a person that got interested in studies that led him to be able to develop these powers, and they're
Yeah.
almost like it was almost through the power of study and meditation and like finding the right gurus that he was able to pick up. It's a little bit white man goes east and comes back with interesting shit type of stuff, because they kind of kept it very vague, it was always, I don't know. It was just nice, and honestly, it was perfect for radio as well because, like,
Yeah.
for all the reasons when you guys listen to it, but just and the laugh and all those things, and how his voice is breaking people down and they can't see him. But yeah,
I,
he waits to be physical, and
yeah.
that's kind of something that I thought was interesting. That a lot of the invisibility here was used like almost like a Nightcrawler character, where he's just coming out of the woodwork and throws a jab and then disappears again and throws another jab. And
And
yeah, Alec Baldwin was a
interesting choice. I mean,
interesting choice.
it makes more sense when you think about where he was in the 90s, and like they were trying to, I mean, he in it to varying degrees of success as a leading man and stuff. I mean, I'm a fan of Alec Baldwin's work, but like very different now in 2024 when you think of the last 10 years
Right.
and things like that. But I mean, I think the moments of conflict in this movie that worked well were like the beginning of those moments, like the opening scene on the, well, not opening, but the early scene on the bridge with the mobsters, when you just hear the Shadow cackling in the background, and then he, like, that stuff is cool. Like, and that to me, from hearing you describe it, Kyle, feels more akin to what I imagine the radio show was too, of like, yeah, just kind of like messing with people's minds and stuff. I did appreciate like what they were experimenting with, like the scene in the lab when he is fighting all the bad guys, and like they're trying to shoot him, and at one point they like catch his shadow on the wall and he like comes out of the wall like that. I mean, it was bad old special effects, but like I appreciate that they tried something kind of different and unique with that. But it again was kind of like unclear of like, okay, like, is he really a shadow? Like, is
Yeah.
this a mystical thing, or is
Right.
he literally just hypnotizing them into thinking he's a shadow right now? Because once they shone the light on him, like, I did get in my head, and I'm going to get in my head right now, of like the logistics of this, because if he is a shadow and then they shone the light on him and he like was like he couldn't move because they were showing the light on him, and then he became whole from the shadow. I'm like, well, but if there's no light on you, then you can't be a shadow.
Mm.
So I
I
was
mean,
like
the
really
powers are not well
confused.
defined. The
Yeah,
powers
yeah,
are very confusing, very
And
ill
they
defined.
yeah, and they kind of tried to do so much that almost demands more definition.
yeah,
Whereas and honestly, I would love to see someone tackle the shadow with like a 30-minute kind of monster of the week type of thing.
that's what I was gonna say. Like, I mean, that's literally what the radio show is, right? Maybe
Yeah.
not 30 minutes, but like this feels. I mean, it should be a serial series. Like, it should be a 30 or an hour long episodic kind of thing versus a movie. Like, this feels like a very easy case, and I imagine in the 90s that would have done well too, like if they would have just made a TV show. So what a pity that is.
And
Another
you could have just in the 90s too, like with special effects, you don't even have to like you don't need to like blur him out. You just
yeah,
need his voice.
yeah,
And like you don't even he doesn't even need to be there, and then you cut and he's there, and then he fucking punches somebody in the face, and like it would have been so accomplishable with
yeah,
what was available then, that they Hollywood got its hands on it, and I
yeah.
understand all those things and whatever, but yeah, so I was just it was It was tricky, and he's just not such a smarmy ass in the radio as well. Like he's a little bit more, like he's a little bit more just a guy living, always intrigued and always like wanted to use his powers for good or whatever. But it doesn't have this, doesn't have it doesn't get to that network of craziness and all that stuff. And
Yeah. Well, it's so weird to think about this in like and we talked at length about the backstory that this has, and Alex, you gave us the context of seemingly where the writer came from, and putting that in here. But like, it to me, it feels weird to think about like you didn't need that. Like,
yeah,
there's some tie back at the end when he's fighting Khan and the dagger, but like you could have done that a different way or not had the dagger. Like it really just kind of confuses the character more, and like it tries to like it sets it up for a really interesting like amoral character and having some really interesting commentary on like morality and like how much work you need to do to redeem yourself and stuff like that. But it never actually, like, I don't even want to say it asks those questions and doesn't answer them. It like just it's like you can see someone thinking of asking those questions, but they never do, because you could have done some really cool things with like, yeah, he was a warlord for 7 years and he left that and came back to the city and has all these resources to set up this network to do good, but those connections still come back and kind of haunt him, or like people still recognize him or reach out to him as the warlord, or fear him or whatever. You could have had these things happen where his past caught up to him a little bit and he had to reconcile that with his love interest or with his uncle who was the police commissioner who got hypnotized every night seemingly when he thought about going after the shadow. So there's a lot of like,
or just some internal conflicts
yeah,
in Alec Baldwin's characterization. Like I think he was at his best when he was portraying the Shadow as kind of a smarmy, you know, when he was doing his playboy, rich boy, defense. He made a pretty good Bruce Wayne analog when he's like in the nightclub with his uncle. I thought those scenes were fun. But yeah, there was no sense of any internal conflicts from his previous warlord days, which could have been mined for compelling drama. And there are definitely lines of dialogue between him and um, what's the villain's first name? He's a Khan.
Shiwan or Shaiwan,
Yeah,
Shiwan.
yeah, Shiwan Khan. So yeah, Shiwan Khan has a couple lines about his warlord past, but there's never any internal conflicts that we see through Baldwin's performance, and that's such a big miss for a movie that seems to be revolving around that depth that it doesn't explore.
Yeah. Well, should we move on to uh, Sam Raimi's Darkman, which was my favorite of these three, and I'm embarrassed to say that I had never watched this in its entirety as a huge Raimi fan, and
Yeah,
uh,
that surprised me that you hadn't
yeah,
seen this before because I know how much you love Army of Darkness
yeah.
and the Evil Dead movies.
And I've seen Army of Darkness probably 50 times, and the Evil Dead movies pretty damn close to that. And I've definitely seen parts of this, caught it on TV, and was familiar with it. I honestly think I might have seen Darkman 2, Die Darkman, or no, Darkman 2 is the Return of Durant, and then the third one is Die Darkman Die. And uh, unfortunately, Liam Neeson does not return in either of those, but it's instead Darkman is played by Arnold Vosloo, who you would recognize as the Mummy from the first two Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser. And I definitely remember seeing those on TV in like the 2000s. But I loved this, and I recognize that my high level of affection for this is paired with my appreciation for Rami's work. And uh, this, I think, came out 2 years or before Army of Darkness. Because Army of Darkness was 92. Yeah, and this was 90. And I think that's part of why I loved it so much, is because there's so much visually that's going on that you can see as kind of precursor for stuff that he does in Army of Darkness with Bruce Campbell. So to me, it felt like I wouldn't call it a brother film or a sibling of Army of Darkness, but it definitely feels like a cousin to Army of Darkness in theme and just in characterization and visuals, especially. And so I just kind of got a kick out of being like, he does that too in Army of Darkness, but he like did it a little better or did it a little differently. I also just thought like the character of Darkman is pretty compelling in a way to me, of like an original anti-hero. Obviously out of these three movies, he's the only one that is like original to this material, I believe. And so I thought it was kind of cool to see that enacted on screen. I thought Liam Neeson did great and was having a blast. It seemed like kind of hamming it up. This is probably the earliest Liam Neeson movie I've ever seen. Um,
Frances McDormand too.
yeah,
When
Yeah,
she showed up, I was like,
she's
oh
young in
wow.
this.
yeah, I didn't know she was in this at all.
I mean,
Um,
it speaks to that we've been doing this long enough, Dustin. That in about 10 minutes in this movie, I was like, oh no, yes, Dustin loves this movie. Like I can just I was and like I definitely was like, no, I'm sure Alex is gonna like it as well. But this is really up Dustin's alley.
yeah, yeah,
And I did, to not just be negative about it, because I liked it second, just because of how much I didn't like The Shadow. But uh there is a nice, the whole device, whatever you want to call it, where he's working on this skin regeneration stuff, and it gives him this ability to enter back into the world for this fleeting and therefore tragic amount of time. That in and of itself, as a device, I can appreciate, as a plot device, as a mechanism, whatever you want to call it again. But like, I can appreciate the creativity of that, and kind of that merging with the whole narrative of this character and the way the story flows.
uh-huh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I appreciated, there's definitely a few scenes where I kind of like the zaniness a lot.
Well,
I was a big fan of the initial gunfight, where that dude's like, like he's very surprised. Like there's a couple of turns that really got me, and I enjoyed, I enjoyed him cutting off people's fingers with the cigarette thing, because I was like, that's would be very difficult to do.
yeah, right, yeah,
Like incredibly difficult. That thing would
yeah.
have to be hilariously sharp. But
Yeah, that initial gunfight, like the very opening scene, is
yeah,
the
yeah,
one you're
yeah,
talking to.
yeah, yeah,
Like that whole thing, I was like, how the fuck are these guys winning here? Like the dude hobbled in like with a gun for his leg,
yeah,
and like seemingly that was like the only gun that got through, and there was like 50 people, and like how are they not having the upper hand here? And also on that note, when they break into what's Darkman's actual name? I should know this, but I don't. Dr. Westlake, Dr. Peyton Westlake, when they break into his lab to steal the thing that he didn't realize he had, I loved so much that they're panning around, and he realizes that Durant, the main bad guy, and all of his cronies are in the room, right? And he's looking around, and he's got 3 or 4 of them, and one of them is the guy from the opening scene who snuck in a gun because he's missing a leg. Instead of a prosthetic leg, he had a gun. So another guy grabs the gun and he's hopping, right? Because he took the gun.
yep,
I loved the fact that when they break into the lab, the only person there is Dr. Westlake, and the rest are all in on it. Like they're all the bad guys. But yet Westlake looks over and sees the guy fucking hopping, which implies that someone pulled his gun out from his leg and he didn't bring his actual prosthetic leg. Cause he like, that's how he transports the gun, is using it as a leg or something.
yeah.
And so I just thought that was kind of absurd. Let me ask you this though, Kyle. Do you feel like, of the 3 movies we're talking about tonight, which one do you feel like had like the most, like that you feel like you could see a vision from a director in, like that, whether you
Yeah.
liked it or not, like that, like, yeah, this person like really wanted to create something here.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like what I was referring to as tone, but I mean it is Raimi's auteurism, right? Like it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, and that was realized as much as it wasn't my particular flavor. Like that definitely is realized, and I mean, and I am not a Sam Raimi fan, but not because I don't respect what he is trying to do and has been able to accomplish. Like this is something my another one of my friends and I always talk about with regard to movies is that we can forgive a lot and appreciate a lot about ambitious
Uh-huh.
ambitious attempts to make a movie, and to be able to actually execute all the way through, keep that tone, keep that pace, have that kind of whimsical nature of it. I mean, this is the guy that put the dancing in Spider-Man and was like, we're doing it. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that perspective and ability and willingness to do stuff like that, I think is the reason why also, it's the reasons why when this movie does work, and it does work for a lot of people, I'm about that, and
Yeah.
like that is what I do kind of come to cinema for, as much as I mean, it's kind of like it's like a tasting menu. You know what I mean? You put your hands you put your stomach in your hands in the what am I trying to say? You put your stomach in the hands of the chef, and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to like all these things that come out, but I'm going
Yeah.
to respect what's being attempted here, and I'm not going to. What am I going to like say? Yeah, I want that, but like take that part off. Like, no, you're just there for the tasting menu. You're going for it. You have things to say about every little dish, and that's kind of how I feel about this movie, and also directors like Sam Raimi as well. But I do think he's pretty unique as
Yeah.
things go. But yeah, I mean, most of his body of work is just kind of not my flavor. But I do respect the ambition. So to answer your question in a very long way, yeah, this is definitely the movie
Yeah.
that has that the most, that
Yeah.
understands itself
Yeah.
the most
Right.
Yeah.
completely.
And I would
Created
argue,
by someone with a singular vision, for sure.
yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, like, kind of adjacent to that, when I think of these three movies, like, I feel like to me, this one tells the most compelling story, hands down. And the Phantom, I feel like, is a distant second in that regard in telling I wouldn't call the Phantom story particularly compelling, but I would say it tells a good story that feels whole, and
Sure.
the Shadow feels
Bones are
very,
there.
yeah, and the Shadow feels very disjointed to me, and like that
Mm-hmm.
it had a lot of ideas that threw up, like someone threw on the wall, and then most of them didn't stick. But for me, and again, these are rose-colored glasses, clearly biased by my love for Rami, but like this movie feels like it has like a very clear like vision and story to it that he tells in a way that was like very, everything lands in the way I expect he intended it to land in this one, whether you like it or not. I feel like I see that very clearly here. Alex, what did you think of this? I know you mentioned at the beginning that you'd seen it about 10 years ago, but you said you liked it even more on this rewatch.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the word love bouncing around my head as I think about this movie, and I think it is this combination of I do, like you, Dustin, really dig Sam Raimi as an auteur. I like his B movie camp, and I like his visual flourishes. And the Evil Dead movies were great for me. Love his Spider-Man movies. Again for their camp and their kind of heightened factor. But I might even put Darkman pretty high in my Sam Raimi filmography, and I think it has to do with Peyton, with our protagonist, and with that story. And with all of that like cartoonish B movie bombast where you have, a villain whose trademark is cutting people's fingers off with a cigar cutter and, ridiculously like kind of intentionally inflated, overacted scenes. You also have this like deep, deep pathos and tragedy. And there's like it's kind of like a gothic horror story, what happens to Peyton. And I think Liam Neeson plays it perfectly. Where I love those scenes that you mentioned, Kyle, where he's got his mask with the synthetic skin on. He's overcome his disfigurement temporarily, but it's kind of like a perverse Cinderella. The clock is
Mm-hmm.
ticking. He's going to turn into a pumpkin real soon. And you can see that in the way that he emotes. You can see the fear, the horror. I love the elements that part of his, superhero transformation is he loses the ability to regulate his emotions. Everything's super fucking heightened. Like, he feels all of these things so acutely. Yeah, I just think there's so much soulfulness to the character, and I think Liam Neeson really brings that out. And I think the campy excess, the stylistic flourishes, all of those like crazy zoom ins and camera.
The
To
whole
me, they
carnival scene.
the whole carnival scene, all that campy, you know, stuff that I gobble up greedily, it heightens the tragedy and like the melancholy. And I think they work in concert. And, when it's got him at the end, like basically riding off into the crowd with his Bruce Campbell mask, mild spoilers for the last scene of Darkman, you know, it all clicked for me, and I'm like, this is great shit. You've got camp, you've got pulp, but you've got this real like humanity and tragedy that just had me, yeah, hook, line, and sinker. I love this movie. I'll say it.
Yeah. Something interesting I dug up on this is that the genesis for this and Rami creating his own character or superhero is he wanted to make a movie based on The Shadow. And Universal, and this was in the early 80s after coming out of Evil Dead 2, and Universal, who was working on their adaptation for a long time, wouldn't give him the rights to it. So he went ahead and made his own character.
Fascinating.
That's so. Oh, it's tragic.
What could have
To
been.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh man, that's because like
yeah.
I don't even know if I would have liked it, but I know I would have
It would
liked
have
it
been
more than
more.
that.
Yeah,
More
it would have
Yeah.
interesting than
been
that shit.
It would have
more
been
at
more
least.
coherent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have at least been an interesting watch, if not a good watch, an interesting one for sure.
Yeah. I can't. I'm just looking up Sam Raimi's stuff. Did he actually direct the Multitude of Madness, the Multiverse of Madness, the
He
Doctor
did.
Strange?
He did.
Huh.
He came in. He wasn't the original director attached to
Oh
it.
right, he had to
Yeah,
save it.
yeah. And I have many issues with that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the moments in it that they let Rami be Rami, like really, I don't know if I'm saying his name right. I should figure that out. But the moments that let him be him, uh, you really feel exciting. It reminds me of Spider-Man 2. There's a great sequence when after the arms get melded to Doc Ock's back and the surgeons are trying to disconnect them, where he just goes like full horror movie, and it's like a 5-minute sequence that it literally feels like you're watching Evil Dead 2. And it's like you could put any scene like that up and I'd be like, oh, that's Sam Raimi. Like, you could just tell stylistically that it's done in a way that's very much him. Um, but yeah, like it would have been really cool to see him do an adaptation of The Shadow. I think that would have been a lot more interesting than what we got with Baldwin.
Still possible, Sam.
Yeah,
If you're listening,
right.
get after it. You have the cash. You have Disney cash now. Like, come on.
It would have
Give
been
it to us.
interesting to see. Like, eventually I think I'm going to go back and, well, I might as well say I didn't watch the sequels to this. I saw parts of them, but to watch the 2 Darkman sequels, I know they're not going to hold a candle to this because Sam's not directing them and Liam Neeson's not in them, and I think the only person that returns is the bad guy, Larry Drake as Durant, comes back in the second one somehow. But otherwise, like, I'm just curious. Like, I feel like they could still be fun in their own way as like C movies, like direct to DVD kind of stuff. But this for me, like, I was like, man, yeah, like this just feels like cool, like peak early 90s, late 80s, like, you know, just kind of comes through like in clutch of a action hero, like superhero movie that was different. And I mean, I guess there wasn't a whole lot out around this time. You had Batman, Tim Burton's Batman, and that was kind of it in the early 90s of superhero movies like worth a shit. Because I do think there was like Dolph Lundgren Punisher and that shitty Captain America movie with I forget what his name is, J.D. Salinger's son, and Captain America was in the early '90s too. But
Wild.
yeah, so like I think this probably sat in a really cool space when it came out. I wish I would have been older than 3 years old so I could have like gone to the theaters and enjoyed it in the theaters when it was released. Did you just jump back because I? Oh, okay. I thought you
Nope.
jumped. You were like, "Wait, how old are you?"
No.
um, yeah, yeah. I love this too. I'm probably gonna get a hold of it on like 4K when I can and add it to my collection. This feels like one that would be, if there's any really good like making of documentary, it would be fun to watch. Evil Dead 2 has a really great like 30-minute making of documentary of all the effects called The Gore the Merrier, that I've probably watched as many times as I've seen the movie, because on the VHS tape of Evil Dead 2 I had growing up, the documentary was after the credits played in the movie. It went into the documentary, and so we watched that every time. But this one, I imagine, if there is any good behind the scenes footage and stuff, would be stuff that I would watch on a DVD if they had it.
Something that's going to be interesting for me is I'm a lazy man, and so when I've long lost the ability and desire to like find a way to watch these movies for free. I think I've like mentioned that. And so and also we were watching so many movies. I also have a difficult time being like, you want me to rent this movie for $6 or $4, but I could buy it for $5? I have a very hard time not being like, I don't even care. I'm going to give you that extra $1 just so I can own it, because I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to watch this in 48 hours that you're going to give me, and then I'm just going to rent it again and have spent $8.
Yeah.
And so, but there's going to be these interesting moments years from now, within the next few years, where I'm on planes and I have all of these movies downloaded on my Apple, and I'm going to turn one on because it's going to be a 6-hour flight, and I'm going to watch it, and it's going to have like some of these are the types of movies that I, as we have seen, like can initially pull back from and initially like not be into. And a lot of that can come from the distractions of the world and whatever. Like again, like we've talked about, seeing things in the theater is a completely different thing. And I'm gonna watch one of these like in a situation where there's nothing else to do but watch it, and I could just see some of them, not all of them,
Yeah.
and not all of the ones today, but like Darkman specifically of these three will be. I now own the Phantom as well. Thank you, great. It was $1 more to buy it. What am I gonna do? And I'm gonna watch them. And there's my another one of my friends who's big into he's more into music. He always talks about albums as growers or faders,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
there's a lot to the movie world that I think is similar in that way. And this is one where initially I can be like, oh god, maybe I just wasn't in the right mindset or wasn't in the right whatever.
I was gonna say that earlier. I feel like this is one movie of everything. Not that you've disliked a ton of stuff that we've watched, but like
Yeah.
of anything that we've disagreed on in terms of how much we enjoyed, I feel like this is one that I would feel confident in saying that I could see you. Not that it would become your favorite movie or anything.
Yeah, but it would become like a kind of thing that's like, oh, I'm on a plane, I'm watching Darkman.
Yeah, and
You
then
know what I
watching
mean?
it and
Like,
being like, actually, no, like this is good. Like
but
I enjoyed this. Now that I
yeah,
like, not that there's like a lot of little Easter eggs, or not even Easter eggs, but like little meticulous details that you can pick up on in another viewing. But I feel
yep,
like this is a movie that, because some movies are like that are a lot of fun to rewatch because you're like, oh yeah, I didn't notice that. Or for me, it's like movies like that fall into two categories. One of rewatching it and I'm like literally looking at the story and being like, oh, there's that hint and there's that thing, and it's fun to connect that. Other times, after seeing it the first time and then going back and rewatching it, I'm just literally thinking of the mechanics of how the movie's made, because I know the story and I know how the movie plays out. So now I can just kind of be like, oh yeah, it's cool how they did, this scene, or they set the camera for this, or like I can kind of let my mind go into that sandbox. But this movie, I feel like I don't know that it necessarily would fit in either of those, but I just feel like I could see you rewatching this based on what I know about how we've talked about movies as we've been recording this podcast, and rewatching it and being like, no, like actually now I like know what I'm in for, and
Mm-hmm.
it allows you to appreciate it more and to
I think
enjoy it more, kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I like going into movies real blind. You know what I mean? So like when I turned it on, the first time that I knew this was that Liam Neeson was involved was when I purchased it. And the first time I, like Frances McDormand was involved was when I purchased it. And I think those two actors with what they have become in
Yeah,
my
yeah.
history, it kind of fucked with my expectations of
You're
what
like,
was coming.
I know this isn't what you're saying with Liam Neeson, but you're like, Qui-Gon Jinn, what the hell?
Yeah, I'm like, there's all these, there's this all, and like
Or like
Frances
Frances
McDormand
McDormand.
was, yeah, more jarring, like
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
because
whatever
you're
Three
probably coming in,
Billboards.
like, thinking of, yeah, 3 Billboards, you're probably thinking of Fargo, where she's playing these, like,
Yes,
very naturalistic characters
yeah.
who, like,
and
emote.
incredible. The kind of characters that would not like the scene where I mean the beginning of the movie where she's like getting into a taxi and like kind of aloof that he's actually asking her to marry him, but he's doing it in this really stupid way.
Uh-huh.
That also I was like, yeah, this is how I think people proposed in 92 or whatever. Like this tracks somehow of my 6-year-old
Uh-huh.
understanding of that. And that whole scene was just so unsatisfying, and it's not what the movie's about, right? But
Yeah,
I'm like
yeah.
those two actors talking about getting married. I was just like,
What is
what
going on?
what is
Yeah.
going? Why are they?
And then your subconscious just kind of hooks onto that, and so your perception of what you're seeing kind of distorted from
And so
that
yeah,
going
and so
forward.
like you guys talk about the carnival scene, and that was where I was like, I can't take this right now.
Yeah, yeah. You
And
should,
you guys are fully in, which that's the kind of scene that I think it's the kind of scene
yeah,
over time
yeah.
that like that's the scene I'm thinking of that.
You should go back and rewatch just the carnival scene.
Yeah,
I think I might go back tonight and rewatch just the carnival scene, because
It's so good.
it really is like, it is the most Sam Raimi scene in the entire movie. That was the scene where I was like, this is like fucking evil, or Army of Darkness. This feels like Army of Darkness in the best possible way. Um, and I feel like if I had to describe this movie to someone, or like if I was allowed to pull one scene from this movie to like share with someone, that would be the scene that I would pull. And I don't
mm,
even think it like is super, like, I don't think it's so jarring from the rest of the movie, but I don't think it like distills the story super well or anything. But I think it's like the most fun scene in the movie, because
Yeah.
it's just,
It captures the tone perfectly, and I love, talking about the performances and your expectations of those two performers, Kyle. I think it shows how game Liam Neeson
yeah,
and Frances McDormand are as performers, and that like they clearly got what Sam Raimi was going for.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
they knew that like, okay, this guy wants something campy, heightened, exaggerated. We are
yeah,
not going for realism here.
melodramatic. Yeah,
yeah.
Melodrama, yeah, theater acting, and I can like visualize them emoting in that scene, and it's just cracking me up because they go so big with it.
And then
But
you have
yeah,
I mean, the unsung hero of that scene is the Carney, that is
oh, the
like
Carney's amazing.
completely apathetic.
The
And like,
visceral, yeah, the visceralness of me, like I wanted to kick the shit out of
I
him.
know, I
And like
know.
what that teased out of me, but then of course, yeah, again, like I'll watch. Don't worry, I'll watch it again. It'll happen. But it reminds me also, like, what was the? It was I think of the first or second three movies we watched, and it's the one that's dystopian, and there's radioactive world, and the really
Dystopian
creepy
radio.
fat guy comes in,
Oh,
and
yeah, the what was it called? Hardware.
Hardware.
oh,
That is
thank you.
Yeah,
that's another movie I own that that I feel like I'll watch on a plane at some point, and I will continue because there were so many little things in that I liked, and it's the kind of
yeah,
thing that on rewatch you'll pick up a little bit more of that.
yeah.
So yeah,
That's a good example of that. Like, that's one where I think someday I will rewatch it. I don't know if I'll like it anymore, but I do feel like there's enough that I probably didn't pay attention to that I would be interested in revisiting that to digest different parts of it. But
yeah,
yeah, Darkman. And of these three movies, between The Shadow, The Phantom, and Darkman, I feel like Darkman was the one that was having the most fun. That was just like just kind of going all out and being weird as shit, which is to be expected when you know who's behind it and everything. But
Yeah. I'm curious, because we're talking about all these elements with the movie, if the tragedy of it, the horror of it, if that resonated with either of you guys, because that was definitely, something that took this from, oh, this is a really fun romp, stylistically well directed, to, oh, this is real good shit. There's actually like you know, real human emotion being mined here, as comically exaggerated as it is.
yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of, at least at this time, and Sam's like filmography is a kind of a rare duck. Like I think he did some stuff later in the 90s. I forget what I think it's got Kate Blanchett. It's like a thriller horror, like where she's like a psychic, that I think has a lot more emotion to it and tragedy behind it. But yeah, comparing to like Army of Darkness, which is not like, I mean, yes, it's a tragedy in one way, but is more like that's not the focus of it. That visceral kind of horror of what's actually happening with Peyton and him losing his face, and I do think like that was an undercurrent for me. Like I'm probably a little bit blinded by just like the giddiness of being such a fanboy over it and stuff. But I do think that like I feel like I noticed that most in the moments when he reunited with his fiance and uh was cutting it short after all these times because his prosthesis was going to expire or whatever,
Right.
and feeling frustrated of like, just tell her what happened to you, just like explain what's going on. And like that's kind of a cliche, I feel like, in these stories where someone is damaged and they're hiding it from the person they love and the person they love because they're worried that person won't accept them or anything. And so I do feel like it's funny because it maybe is a bit warranted when he does reveal his face to her and she's kind of like, oh, like not that she viscerally repels from it or anything, but like that she's not immediately like okay with it, because he does look pretty fucking gnarly. Like dude's
Oh
like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, he's yeah, yep.
He's a
I
crispy
didn't
boy.
realize I didn't realize Raimi did A Simple Plan.
yes,
That's
Simple Plans is another good
I've
one.
never
Yeah.
I've
that is
never
my
seen
favorite.
that one.
That's got to be my. Oh yeah, that's good, Alex.
Wow.
We should work that into something.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's one that I saw when I was starting to get into movies, but I was not keeping
the
track of directors.
the Gift is the one I was thinking of, a
Oh yeah,
paranormal thriller film. I haven't seen that in a long time. uh, yeah, we could probably do, hell, maybe some one of these days I'll do a Rami episode. And
yeah. I mean, as long as it has a simple plan, so we can get Alex to see it
yeah,
in game. Because I
Sign me
also
up.
like. I think there's a lot of Sam Raimi movies that I've started and not finished. If I'm honest with you, and this would
yeah.
force me in the best way to do that.
Well, I think we can just about wrap up here. Maybe each of us can go through our ranking here of, we'll do least favorite to most favorite. Mine, just to reiterate, I picked the order of my least to most. The Phantom, least favorite by a country mile. The Shadow, second least favorite. Was that the right? Well, it's number two.
It's
Kind
in
of
the
mid
middle.
ground there. And then by another country mile, Darkman was my favorite of these three. Like, really is the only one that I would qualify as like a winner of these three. Kyle, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, Phantom is one for me. Darkman is two, and Shadow is three in terms of. But I don't necessarily, like I talked about, expect that to stay that way over time.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Shadow being
Just
the
might as
Shadow
well
being an
fall off the
ocean and
list.
just an
Yeah.
ocean away.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
country,
for sure.
so many country miles.
I can
John
see that.
Denver's
Yeah.
just the whole way, and yeah.
It's the nose. Yeah. The nose. You've
Oh my
just
god,
that all
that
the way down.
nose. And
Yeah.
I also like how they never just let anything be. They're like, oh, let's show him becoming the nose. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would almost have liked it if they were like, "Oh yeah, she's the shadow now, so let's put the nose on," but like never really show that. And it's just like, why is that happening? Who cares? We're not going to talk about it. But no, there was like a close up of he's looking dramatically into the camera, and his nose is
Yeah.
going to elongate, and he'll put on his fucking
Yeah. Yeah, I would have appreciated if they would have just never shown him without the cowl over his mouth.
yeah.
Like that was enough for me. Like, and I feel like as a kid I would see that, like I remember seeing it on TV and being like, is that real? Is that, like, I couldn't, it was just enough as a kid who was an idiot that I couldn't tell if that was fake or not. Alex, how about your ranking?
Yeah, I think they're going to be a mirror of yours. I think number 3 is the Phantom. Number 2 is the Shadow, and I was thinking with just you talking about rewatching any of these movies on a plane, Kyle. I don't think I would ever go back and rewatch the Phantom or the Shadow. I think
Yeah.
I think I think
I
one
also
and
don't
done.
think I would.
Yeah, one and done is good for me. And then Darkman, head and shoulders, a tier above. For anyone listening, that is the one I would definitely recommend you seek out if you have not seen it before, because it's dope shit. But yeah, I really liked this grouping, and it was fun to see two flops that I have known about for my entire adult life but never seen. So it was cool to see why they were flops.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will catch you listeners on our next episode. Thanks.